Turnout in last week's elections in Colorado pretty much off the charts. Colorado saw the nation's second highest voter turnout rate in the midterm election, with 61.9% of active voters participating. This according to numbers released by Secretary of State Wayne Williams' office yesterday. Minnesota, in case you're keeping track, came in at number one at 64.3%. But if you look at the election in the aggregate, it seems as though voters were sending some mixed messages. Here to break it all down this morning is Executive Director of Colorado Rising Action, Michael Fields. And Michael, I'm not so ready to say that we've gone blue, but I think that we're somewhere in the middle of purple kind of shading over to blue. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt in this election that Democrats did very well. They swept all the statewide seats. Jared Polis won by 10%. The state Senate and state House are both in Democratic hands, so I think they definitely had a good night in terms of those offices. But as you mentioned, the ballot issues did go the other way. The tax increases both lost, setbacks lost. So there's some positive things to look at. I mean, I think they said we wanted Democrats in there for the next 2 years, but we wanted to constrain how much money that they could spend. And I think that was the overall message.
Well, and it's interesting, okay? So the voters put Democrats in place for the next 2 years, but don't want them to spend more money. It seems like a contradiction in terms.
Yeah, I think it does, but I think it's, partially, a statement on how they feel about, what's happening in national politics. I mean, you saw somebody like Mike Kaufman, who won by 9% 2 years ago, lose by 11%. I mean, that's a 20% swing in just 2 years. I think if you look at these suburbs, you look at Jefferson County, Arapahoe County, the president's approval rating is not very high there, and I think that's more stylistic than it is policy-based. But it definitely has an impact down ballot. But yeah, I think, this, and the ballot issues, we remained a state that says, you're going to have to make a really good case to us if you want more of our taxes. And that happened on the local level in some areas. Right. But statewide, they're saying, we're giving enough money already. Why don't you show us what you can do with that? And then come back to us later. What
happened with the Congressional Leadership Fund in terms of Representative Kaufman? He lost funding at a very high level, and then you had Trump even coming out, President Trump, and taking a shot at him.
Yeah, right after the election, he did. And I think part of that was, Kaufman was known to distance himself from several of the policies of the president. I think the money was taken away mainly because of polling. I mean, there was polling that was showing him down 10%, and there was other races that, seemed closer, and so you saw money shift. I think it was just too much for him to overcome. In Arapahoe County, I mean, there was, state house districts that were shifting 20% just this year. And unaffiliated voters, there was more of them this year, and they broke, 60-40 against Republicans. And so I think that's adding all these things up. Republicans have to regroup and figure out, how in 2 years from now they can do better. I mean, Y and Z, the amendments Y and Z passed. Therefore, when redistricting happens, it'll be a process that isn't as partisan, which is a good thing for Republicans, given the fact that they don't have any control over stuff. But I think you're going to see Democrats overreach as they did in 2013 here. Governor Polis is definitely has a bold agenda, a progressive agenda, and I think you're already seeing some of those policies being talked about before session even started.
Michael, I had an interesting conversation last night with our Weld County political insider, Sherry Pife, who writes for, Complete Colorado. And we were talking about Polis and Governor-elect Polis, of course. And she made the point that she, as do many others, believe that he has much higher political aspirations. We're talking the presidency at some point in time. Wanted to get your take on that. But yes, he is rather progressive, but you have to wonder if he's going to moderate some of those goals in order to fulfill that wish of seeking higher office. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think it's a wild card. It's an unknown right now. I mean, 2 days after he got elected the governor, one of his businesses was taking out the Polis for President website. So I think there's no doubt that he has higher aspirations, as a lot of senators and governors do. But I think it's TBD in terms of, is he going to take more of a John Hickenlooper approach, let the legislature fight over some stuff and send him some stuff, and maybe he'll push back against them some. I think Governor Hickenlooper didn't like when he had all Democrats in control. He liked that balance. Does Polis take that route, or really, be an activist, like he has been up until this point? I don't know. I could see it going either way. I think you're going to have some very interesting bills coming out of, especially the state house, where they have a 41 to 24 majority. So I think we're going to have to see, and we'll know pretty quickly, is he going to sign everything that they're sending him, or is he going to push back and say, you know what, this is still a purplish state. I want, higher aspirations. I don't want to ruin our economy. I think you could see that too.
8:14 now, 1310 KFKA, 1310KFKA.com. Michael Fields is Executive Director of Colorado Rising Action. 112. I think most of us breathed a huge sigh of relief, particularly in Weld County, that this went down in flames, but we haven't seen the last of it, have we?
No, and I think that, it was a good victory for, our state in general. But I think it's coming back, and it's going to come back through legislative means. And they're already talking about, what they'll call a compromise, which just means they're going to add more feet to that setback. And I think this is one of those where people need to stay engaged, because the 2,500-foot setback went down, but it could be a 2,000-foot setback. Jared Polis has supported that in the past. Yes. We do have some people in the state Senate who are a little weary of that, Democrats, and so putting pressure on them to say, you know what, it's a big deal if it's a 1,000-foot setback or it's a 2,000-foot setback for the industry. And so I think, staying on top of that, there's no doubt, and Governor-elect Polis already said that he would sign something. It's going to be a big battle, and, you saw $50 million spent to try to defeat this thing. It could be, for not much of a result if there ends up being a 2,000-foot setback anyway.
It was interesting. I just wanted to ask you before I let you go this morning, so appreciate your being so generous with your time. You had Colorado GOP Chairman Jeff Hayes calling Tuesday night's election results feedback, saying that, at that point in time, I don't think there was any question of that. So what will the GOP do with that feedback? I mean, once they crunch the numbers and get into all the analytics.
Well, I think it's staying broad and saying, did Republicans really have a positive message, what we were for? And I think, you saw most of it of what we were against. I think that we have to do a better job of explaining why conservative principles are better for people. I think Ronald Reagan did a great job of this, being hopeful, being optimistic, sharing plans for a vision for the state. I think that Republicans need to get back to that, and they need to build up their infrastructure. I mean, now is the time to say, you know what, the Democrats in 2003, Jared Polis and the Democrats took, the feedback that they were getting at the time and created think tanks and media organizations and everything else that helps get messages out. And Republicans are behind on that, and we need to catch up. So I think the infrastructure building up, clarifying a message, a positive message, I think are the path forward when the Democrats end up overreaching.
Positivity, something that seems to be missing in large part from our political discourse these days. I wanted to ask you, because you are, so in touch with the pulse of politics, both from, a local, statewide level to the national level. And we spent a lot of time on the show talking about the fact that, the gloves are off when it comes to any semblance of civility in our political discussions. I had pulled this piece out of Axios yesterday, this poll, where they talked to Democrats on Republicans and Republicans on Democrats. And for the most part, Democrats see Republicans as racist, bigoted, sexist, ignorant, spiteful, and yes, evil. Are you seeing that, or is this more churned up by the national news media?
I think that it's definitely worse on the national level. I mean, I deal with a lot of Colorado politics, and there is, some disagreement. There's some, issues. But I think people in Colorado tend to get along a little bit better. I mean, I think if you went on social media, it's probably the place where it's the worst.
Yeah, well,
I try to stay off Twitter as much as I possibly can.
It's a cesspool.
But, yeah, it is. And then you think that everybody is like that. Most people are living their lives, day in and day out, and most people are turned off by that process. That's why we have more unaffiliated voters here than we ever have. So I think our job is to not fall into that, to stay positive. There's so many great things about our state and our country, and focusing in on those and having good contrast in terms of policy. Like, I really believe that conservative policies are better than liberal ones, and this is why, and these are the stories that prove that. But the other side's not the enemy, and they're really good people on both sides of the aisle, and just remembering that, I think, is a key thing.
So what's the focus now for Colorado Rising Action? This is a two-pronged question, and where can we learn more about your work?
Yeah, so our work doesn't stop. The legislative session will start, and so we'll have an impact down there. Also, it's early, but Cory Gardner is going to be running in 2 years. That's going to be a huge race, and so looking at that too, there'll be candidates starting to announce, and we'll look at their record and really look at how they're going to run against Cory Gardner. And so our work doesn't stop. We have to help build that infrastructure side that we were talking about, and our website's coloradorisingaction.org, so look for more information as things go on and as session starts up in January.
Michael Fields, Executive Director, Colorado Rising Action. Thanks, as always, for being so generous with your time and your perspectives.